Hi everyone, welcome to another Breaking Into Data session. Tonight's going to be exciting. It's going to be our first deep dive into looking at the interview process and doing a deep dive into a take-home interview or a case study. With that, just a quick couple of announcements. For everyone on LinkedIn, please give us a like and a subscribe. Always helpful. Have to make a shameless plug. But promotable, what do we do? So we help you break into data, right? Whether that's an analytics role, a data science role, and we do that through a variety of things, but primarily it's the event series like these where we connect you with practitioners who do it every single day. For more on that, feel free to connect with me afterwards. Happy to tell you about all the other stuff that we're working on, including some courses both for non-technical people who want to add to their toolkit, as well as folks who are finishing up a master's degree or a boot camp who are trying to find that first data role. So with that, handing it over to Dr. Scott Adams. So right now he is an associate director of data science, right?
Assistant director.
Assistant director. Oh, they both start with A. So either way, senior data science leader, has done his fair share of both interviewing for opportunities, but also, of course, being on the other side of it now, hiring people. So here to share some insights on what that looks like, and in particular, how to approach that take-home exercise.
All right, thank you, Aaron, and thank you everybody for joining. I'm really excited to be here. I love doing these talks and to share any nuggets of wisdom that I have and can share with you, and hopefully you find it useful. As Aaron said, provide a like to us on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me to send an invite on LinkedIn as well. Happy to add you to my network. And or did you have something to say there, Aaron?
Oh, no, not at all. I'm just looking at the stream and making sure that we're good.
All right, we good?
I'll let you know once things start populating. Why is it not populating? Oh, yeah, we're live. Cool.
We're live? Everything good?
Yeah, everything's good.
We need to do any intros, anything over again?
No, we are totally good. I'm just going to go ahead and drop this into the event page to make sure everyone can see it in case they don't, and then we are good.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about the interview process for data profession roles. And let's start with just talking about, before we actually jump into that take-home part that often strikes fear in the hearts of people, but really shouldn't, and hopefully I can demystify a little bit of that through this talk. But let's just think about the general data science, data analytics, data engineering interview process. There's going to be a variation from company to company, but most places that I've seen, it goes something like you have a screener interview, usually with a representative from the human resources department. And the purpose of that is to basically make sure that you meet basic eligibility requirement, particular are able to legally work in the United States, and meet some of the very basic qualifications. So that one is not a very technical or substantive interview, really just confirming eligibility from there. General, then you go on to a more substantive interview. And the purpose of that interview, or maybe there's 2 rounds, varies at places, is to get a sense of a little bit more of your technical expertise. So, you want to be prepared for some technical, higher level technical questions, some basic questions maybe about statistical concepts or machine learning concepts, those kind of things. And also to get a sense of what we'll say, culture fit. You seem like a good candidate who would like doing this kind of work on a day-to-day basis. That's, again, going to vary by company to company and what culture fit means, but some more of maybe those behavioral questions, personality questions you might get at that round. Then after that, usually you do have this more technical piece. Once you make it through there, determine, okay, yeah, we want to see what this person can really do. And there's different ways that might go about. I know interviewing's not been on site for a while, so a little bit different. But some places you go in, you hear about this whiteboarding interview process where you sit down with somebody and they might say something like, "Hey, I got these two tables. How do you join them together and select certain columns or get the means out of them?" Maybe like a SQL question like that, or a basic Python question about doing some manipulation with pandas, with data frames, something like that. And expected to write this out on a whiteboard, write out your solution. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. Your handwriting, if you're like me, is really messy. So whether it's legible or not is another question. So that's one route that you might see. A lot of companies, though, especially just doing virtual interviewing, might have a take-home assessment. And there's some advantages to this over the whiteboarding approach, in my opinion. One, that you get some actual time to think about it. There's a little bit less stress. And that's the big one. You get some time to think about it. And it goes into a little bit more detail into what you can do. So there are some definite advantages to that take-home part of the interview. And thinking a little bit more detail about why we actually do take-home interviews, why these are fairly common. I mean, one is to gauge candidate interest. You often have a few days, a week, and they said that might take some stress off rather than just being in a place writing on a whiteboard, but also allows you to go into a little bit more depth, which can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you look at it. And that can be a way to gauge candidate interest. Like, are you going to commit to this problem we want to see how you can solve? So that's one part of it. One is to also, it does give an assessment of a candidate's coding capabilities of, can you look at this business problem we have, come up with some kind of coding solution. Again, not something that's perfect, not something that's going to be groundbreaking going into production, but you say that you have these coding abilities in Python or whatever language that you're doing. Can you actually do that? And then the other one that I'm going to focus on a lot that I think sometimes doesn't get as much attention is this ability to actually think through a complex problem and tie those technical skills to a substantive business problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So in other words, the why behind you running a model and interpreting what came out of your model and trying to interpret that in a way that might make sense for a business audience. So there's also this communication part. And often the process is that you have some time to do your take-home assessment, you submit it, and then you get a chance to do an interview with one or more people on a team and talk through your process, what you did, and you'll get a series of questions from the other person or persons on the panel that are interviewing you, and you get a chance to talk about some of the decisions you made. And that's going to be really important. Something I'm going to emphasize here and again and again is knowing why you made the decisions that you made and being able to articulate them. So, the focus of this talk was to think more about, okay, there's a lot of places that do these take-home interviews. They can be a cause of stress, but what does it take to really be successful, to really ace that take-home interview? And in a nutshell, it really involves first understanding the problem you're being asked. So I can't emphasize enough, first step you should do when you get a take-home assignment, read the prompt, read what they're asking you, take a walk, let it get out of your mind, go back, read it again. Make sure that you understand that there can be a lot of energy going into this process and you want to get it done or excited about it or just want to get it out of your mind. But actually reading the prompt and making sure that you have a confident and solid grasp on what is being asked of you is really, really key. And that can be a big difference maker between a successful and non-successful take-home interview. The other part of that, once you understand what you're being asked, really comes down to three things in my mind. Comes down to choosing the right tools for the problem at hand, okay? Being able to use those tools, and then being able to explain why you chose those tools. So that first step of choosing the right tools, for example, if you're asked to look at if your outcome that you're asked to model to your target outcome is a binary outcome, 0 or 1. Say maybe like this person will make a purchase or not. This person will default on a loan or not, 0 or 1. There's only 2 options that somebody can be coded as. Make sure that you're choosing the right tool. In this case, this is a classification problem, so you'd probably go with something like, if we're just thinking of simple regression-based solutions, a logistic regression over a linear regression in that case, or something more complex like a decision tree, maybe even a neural net, depending on the problem. If it's something you're asked to predict, like what is the predicted revenue, for example, over the next year, we're expected to see something like that, where your outcome is more continuum rather than just 2 specific measures. That's more of a classical regression problem. So make sure that you're using the right tool in that sense, that you're actually using a tool that appropriately addresses the problem at hand. Now, the other part, once you have selected that tool I mentioned, is to be able to actually use that tool. And this is where the coding part comes in. This is when you think about a coding assessment interview, this is probably where a lot of the focus is going to be on, is making sure that you can write the code, be it in Python or whatever the coding language is. And one thing I want to emphasize here is it's often good to outline your process, and I'm going to go into an example template that can be used for a variety of problems. It doesn't, don't think of it as something written in stone. It's more of a suggestion, but it's good to outline your approach, what you want to do. So, oftentimes the approach will be you load your data, you do some exploratory analysis on your data, you get your data prepared for a machine learning algorithm or statistical model, do whatever you need to do in terms of recoding, scaling, all that, run your model, and then write about your lessons learned, essentially. So, this is your chance to actually show that you can use the tools that you've selected. And one thing I want to caution, not that anybody on this call would, but to avoid plagiarizing. There's kind of a fine line in coding, right? That we often use solutions that other people have written. I mean, when we go and download libraries on Python or R, these are other tools that people have written. But if you're writing a whole solution on a similar data set that somebody wrote on Kaggle, and somebody finds out, somebody sees it on your coding assessment panel, that's not a good thing. So, it's okay to take inspiration and try to take some tips from what other people have done, but just copy and pasting, avoid that at all costs. Not a good thing. The other thing I will say is, beyond just choosing the right tools, and being able to implement them, is this other part that I said I'm going to emphasize again and again, is being able to understand why you chose those tools. So let's think about a context where you wouldn't understand why you're choosing the tools. You might have a simple classification problem, and you might say, oh, this is a state-of-the-art neural network that we have out there. It's going to be really cool. And it might just be overkill for that problem. You're just trying to find the fanciest, shiniest tool that can impress somebody. And you go through, you write the code, you figure out how to do it. And the question then comes to you, like, why did you choose this tool? Well, no, it was the coolest, most groundbreaking thing I could find is not going to be a good answer. So that's where, really understand the tool you're using, choose a tool that you're comfortable with, and that you can really explain why you're using that tool. This gets into like some of the questions that you might get asked for, like, why did you choose a specific approach, a specific tool? You can get down to details like, why, let's say you're running some kind of classification algorithm, why did you choose log losses, your metric by which you're evaluating your final models, rather than like an ROC curve, something like that? So understanding those kind of questions, understanding in the data pre-processing step, why did you impute missing data, for example? Why did you use a mean or a median or some kind of other approach? That's another example of being able to understand and articulate your reason for choosing a specific tool. Also, why didn't you choose a specific tool? that might come up too, like, oh, hey, I've seen that this approach is useful. Why didn't you use this? So having those answers at hand and being really comfortable in understanding why you made the decisions you made and being able to articulate those clearly with other people is really going to be a key to success on acing the take-home interview. So again, once you understand the problem, you want to be able to choose the appropriate tools to handle the problem. Okay. You want to be able to actually use those tools, be comfortable using them, and then be able to explain or defend your choices of the tools that you did and the approaches that you implemented in your coding assessment. So those three things, those will get you a lot closer to success. And even if you don't get the job necessarily, there's a bunch of other factors in determining whether somebody's a right fit for the role or not. You can at least be proud of the work you did and be confident that you gave it a good effort and you put something quality out there. You put quality work out there, which is a good thing. Aaron, I'm gonna move now to sharing my screen. Can't hear you. Oh, I think I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Cool. Yeah, go ahead and share your screen. Let's turn that on.
All right. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
All right, so I posted a link to this, which is hosted on GitHub. I posted a link to this on the LinkedIn page, I guess a post you would call it, on the link to this video. But this is just an example template that I threw together. And again, it's not intended to be, this is something written in stone. You have to follow these steps exactly. More just like a suggestion, a guideline, things that you might consider basic steps into take-home interview and how you might approach it. On my GitHub page, by the way, and also on the LinkedIn, you might see a picture of a cat show up. That is just the image on my LinkedIn profile. That is Zazzles. He is a very fluffy and a giant cat who, surprisingly, as cats go, he'll actually lay down on his belly and let you scratch his belly or armpits, and it's not a trap. He's not going to bite you. It's the most incredible thing ever. Aaron can attest to this. He's met Zazzles.
Indeed.
I also provided in this take-home an example of a data set that you might use. There's a ton of data sets, example data sets that you can find on Kaggle, and that's where this one is taken from. But this one is about HR analytics. It was a good example data set, but feel free, if you do want to use this as a practice exercise, put in any data set that you want. But you can go to the Kaggle page and look at this. And basically what this data set is doing is it's a hypothetical example. You have a potential candidates for a job, and you have this column of people who coded it as value of 1, indicating that those people have indicated that they're looking for a job change, or 0, that they're not. Basically, what you're trying to do is predict the probability that somebody is going to be looking for a job change, and might be a worthwhile candidate to go and look into and try to convince a little bit more to apply for the job that you have. That looking for a job change means that they're open to actually considering a new job offer. So this is another example of a problem where our outcome is just 2 binary categories, so coded as 0 or 1. And so this would be a classification problem. We want to use some kind of classification algorithm to develop a machine learning model here to predict the probability that a given candidate is going to be amenable to looking for a job change based on a variety of other characteristics that we have recorded in the data set for that person. One of the things you'll note here too is that this data set is already split into training and testing sets. So in machine learning, you actually use a training set to come up with the model that you're going to use. And when I say model, I mean, I'm just going to use a regression context here because it's simple as like the actual weights that go in the regression model. So the actual values in the formula, for lack of a better term, that we're coming up with. The training data is how we ascertain that. The test set, then, once we're confident that we have a model that's ready to go, that's the best model that we can get out, we use the test set as data that the model has never seen before to evaluate how well this model is likely to do on data that is new data that's coming in that the model has never seen. Again, this is just a template. Feel free to use any other data set you want to, or not even use this at all, but I'm just going to talk through it here. And these are some basic steps you might consider when doing a take-home interview. They're pretty commonplace in take-home interviews. The other thing I'm emphasizing here is the importance of writing. So, not writing a dissertation or a book or anything along like that, but it's helpful, especially now that we have the ability to write in Markdown in these in like Jupyter notebooks or R Markdown, to actually provide some context of the business problem that you're trying to solve. Okay, so why might a model be useful to provide value here? Well, we could think of something in this case be like, it could be sort of like a screening tool for looking at people who might be interested in applying for our job, rather than having actual human individuals go through a bunch of applications, look at characteristics of other people and make that determination. It can save some time for the human resources department. So that is obviously a good thing, but think about what the actual business problem is that we're trying to solve here. And if you can actually write up a little bit to articulate that business problem that you're trying to solve, that will get you some bonus points, in my opinion, because it shows that you're thinking through the why of we're doing this model, and not just doing it for the sake of modeling because it's fun or whatever. The next step that you'll want to do, import your libraries that you want to use, whether you're using R or Python. There's a bunch of different libraries which contain the functions, capabilities that other people have written that are really useful for manipulating data that you can import. For example, in Python, some basic ones you might want to import are those for data frame manipulation, NumPy for additional like matrix data manipulation, and scikit-learn has a lot of really handy models that you can use. Of course, load your data. Next step I put in here is to conduct an exploratory data analysis to really understand the distributions of your predictors and your target. See if things you might want to look for here is if there's imbalance in your outcome, your target that you're predicting to, if there's just constant variance in some of the predictors. So if some of the predictors, they all have the same value on a column, that's going to be a very useful predictor. You want to see some variation there, so that might be something that you can exclude. And at this point, from exploratory data analysis down to modeling, the other thing I'll emphasize is wherever you can, use meaningful visualizations. It's a cliche, picture's worth 1,000 words, but it's really true in terms of understanding data and data analysis and machine learning and statistical modeling, that if you can visualize it, it just makes it a lot easier for your audience. And it's also a visual device to help you out too when you're talking through this. It'll just make the process easier on both sides for both you and the people that you're talking with. So can't emphasize that enough. At the end of this EDA stage, one thing that a useful goal to have here is to identify columns that are likely to be strong candidate predictors of your outcome. So you might also want to look at correlations between your predictors that you have and your outcome, or other measures of association. But you're trying to whittle things down here, trying to understand your data and whittle down the number of predictors that you have, especially if you have a large data set, to get it down to those that are really going to be the most useful predictors of your outcome, and that are also not going to be redundant. In other words, highly correlated with other features that you have in your data frame that you're using. So we got all that done. Let's say we had this pool of predictors that we say, we think these are going to be good predictors of our outcome. In this case, whether somebody is interested in looking for a new job or not. All right, we're ready to go, right? We can throw it into the model. Not so fast. Got to do some pre-processing. Oftentimes we'll have issues like we'll have categorical variables, which are variables that have no inherent order in the ranking, or not even, there wouldn't be ranking, what am I saying here, that have no inherent like ranked or ordered value in the values. I'm just saying like the same words for the same things. But example would be like, what's your favorite color? Now, of course, in your opinion, You might say, oh, green's the best, that's my favorite color, but in the grand scheme of things, there's really no way to rank what color is best. And when you have variables like that, when you have columns like that, you have to transform that information into meaningful numeric information. So you might take text entries, like, your favorite color, for example, really simple example here, and use a process called one-hot encoding, where you turn the different values that you might have in a single column into individual separate columns that are indicated by zeros and ones. It's, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on it, but you basically need a way to turn non-numeric information into numeric information so that it can be fed through a model, and also do other steps for other columns that are already in numeric format. So for example, you might need to do some scaling of continuous variables to make sure that they're normalized or within a specific range of values. That can be really important for a lot of machine learning algorithms, especially non-tree-based algorithms like neural networks and different regression models. That scaling can really be important to ensure that the value range that you have for a given column isn't unduly affecting your predictions. So you get the data pre-processing, modeling this. That's really important too, checking for missing data and identifying if you need to do any further handling, like an imputation. That you just have a few cases to get rid of it if you want, but if you think it's beneficial to use the imputation method, go ahead and do that there. Just be sure that you can articulate and defend what is for a given imputation method. Now, okay, we went through the exploratory data analysis. We have a good understanding of our data. We went through the data pre-processing. We ensure that all our data are in a format that can be actually read into a machine learning model. And now we get into the actual fun part, the modeling. We get to do this in the classic machine learning modeling framework. We'd run on the test set, do some fine tuning perhaps of our model. And then once we're convinced that we have the best model possible on our training set, evaluate that on the testing set, see how it does on data that the model has never seen before. Okay, again here, reporting appropriate metrics, really important. Being able to understand why you picked those metrics for model evaluation, really important. And again, visualizations can be important here. So for example, for a classic classification task, something like a confusion matrix that shows you number and rate of false positives, false negatives that you might have in predicting your outcome, can be really useful in understanding the value of this model. Finally, you go through all that, you've written all this code, excellent job, you got a model, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but now that's not the end of it. You want to do some kind of summary, a brief summary. Again, I'm recommending 250 words max, not written in stone, just kind of a guideline that I use myself when I like this, like summaries. Provide a summary of the steps that you took in your modeling approach, explain the analytic and modeling decisions you made and why you did them. And also, this is a chance for you to really show as a data professional that you're not only skilled of coding and working with data, but also thinking of the bigger picture, linking it back to the business case. So you might say, well, this model performed well. I think it has promise in actually being useful in being able to distinguish people who are interested in possibly exploring a new opportunity versus those who have no probability whatsoever of pursuing a new opportunity. Or you might come to the conclusion that no, we tried this model, but it's not very useful. It doesn't do a good job in distinguishing those who are looking for a new job versus those who aren't. So let's try another approach. And if that's the case where you say that, no, I don't think this model is good enough to do what we want it to do to really answer that business question, that's okay. Just be prepared to think of some possible alternatives that you might provide, what might be another approach. So in a nutshell, this is a rough guideline of the steps that you might be expected to take and steps that can help you really be successful. Again, you're going to be competing against other candidates for any job there. There's a lot of factors that go into whether the role will be a right fit for you. But at the end of the day, what I want to make sure is that you're able to actually approach an assessment, a take-home assessment, and feel confident that you did good work and be proud of the work that you did, and use that as a foundation point if the job doesn't work out to find something else. And if it does, well, that's awesome. Then this helped get you a job. So let's see here. Where did the stop sharing screen thing go?
I gotcha. Do that.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I don't know where the buttons are. Here I am
Awesome.
talking about technology and data science and stuff, and then I can't figure out how to use this platform. Great.
These things happen. So we've got a lot of questions in here to go through. And before we do that, I actually had one question off. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative here.
There you go.
How often are you able to, say you go through a couple of these kinds of take-home interviews, or general, I mean, I guess this should apply for interviews at large, but how often are you able to actually like either reuse or leverage some of that knowledge you gained from that take-home in a future, whether it's an interview or just like getting some more domain-specific knowledge that will help you in that industry?
Yeah, I would say broadly, that was kind of the point I was trying to make. That's articulated much better, I think, though, is that if the job doesn't work out for whatever reason, you go through the interview and you decide you don't want it, or it's they go with a different candidate. I think these take-home interviews can, you don't have to see it as a failure. It's an opportunity to learn more and to, I don't know, think about what went well, what didn't go well, and use that. So I think those broad ideas are really good. Take the feedback that you learned and use that for next steps. I would read also, they should give you some kind of guidelines and whether you can reuse this code or not. I think that's going to be dependent on each company that you apply for. So I would be careful about that, about reusing the code exactly or reposting your solution on GitHub.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking more from the lines of like understanding like the domain and kind of like the business question and kind of the answers people are looking for, that sort of thing. I probably wouldn't recommend copy pasting and posting the interview online.
Yeah, and it depends. I just say read, and if you're unclear about it, ask the human resources contact or somebody at the company afterwards what you can do with it. But I think that definitely you can take the lessons that you learned from the assessment and go forth and be more knowledgeable.
Yeah, get better for the next one. Okay, so starting out from the top, speaking of resources, Emilio asked, what resources would you recommend to prepare for other take-home assessments? Is there any like sort of online things you think people should read or something else?
Well, yeah, there's this organization called Promotable that does really good work, having speakers come in, do some educational stuff. So that's a really good starting point. There's also...
Love the shameless plug.
Yeah, there you go. On sites like Glassdoor, you can like just go and Google like Glassdoor, Google or Facebook, whatever big tech company, interview questions. And there's often a lot of useful examples of interview questions throughout the process that people post. And those are really helpful. And one thing that I think is useful is to go through some of those examples, find some of those examples, and try to do them on your own.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I really recommend. And a lot of books that are out there, like O'Reilly, I love O'Reilly books that have the fun, delightful animals on them. Here I have an example of one from Spark here. So you might have seen these books. Oftentimes these books have, I don't know, example exercises that you can go through. So really the point I'm trying to make here is that it's not just about consuming knowledge, but actually going and practicing and stuff and seeing where some of your blind spots are that are really useful to go through some of these exercises.
Yeah, there's only so much you can memorize. You learn by just by doing, right, understanding the general frameworks and learn how to go through. How about, because I know often not we, but people kind of in industry will confound analytics and data science and all this stuff. In those interviews, is there ever any overlap in some of those questions between data science and BI or kind of any of the other kind of areas? And I guess the caveat to that question, it might depend on the size of the organization, or if you're like a Series A, you probably do everything. If you're Fortune 500, maybe it's more specialized.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it really what it comes down to is how thorough is the question and what is the end of it. So on a data science interview, I would expect like you to have some kind of model, some kind of predictive model to be your output. For something like an analytics interview, might be like a visualization or some kind of a dashboard that you create and are able to talk about the insights that can be extracted from it. So from a data science perspective, you're probably more likely to create a model that is really a tool that can automate decision making in some kind of context. In an analytics role, you're creating a tool that can help facilitate more human decision making. And that's an oversimplification there, but that's the distinction I see. Now, there's going to be some common steps in both. We talked about loading your data and doing that exploratory data analysis. No matter what data profession you go in, that's going to cut across all of them. Understanding your data, understanding the data that you're working with, and using the appropriate tools is key for success in any data role.
Yeah, and of course, understanding the question, which obviously you mentioned quite a few times. So not to say
read the question, make sure you understand it. Go for a walk, come back, read it again. Talk to Zazzles, come back, read it again. Or if you don't have a Zazzles.
We'll have some complaints, I'm sure. Actually, interesting question. How much time do you usually get for these kinds of things? Is it
generally that's a loaded question.
Give you a day, or some companies are like, you have 2 hours, right, set, go, and some are like, take as long as you want. It's so hard. Doesn't matter how long you take.
Yeah. I don't have a good answer to that because there is so much variability in what I've seen. I have seen some places where, it's like, okay, you have to click on a link, and within a few days, you have to click on that link. It expires within a few days. Once you do click on it, you have 4 or 6 hours to complete this. Other places where it's like a business week or a full week to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It varies, and I guess the point there is that the level of detail that you can provide is going to depend on how much time you have.
Fair enough. And then we have actually a couple of questions here that I think we can answer together. One is asking, how do you convey? Say you're in it and you get the kind of question, you understand what you're supposed to do, but you're stuck on some of the technical execution. Is there any way to like kind of save yourself to kind of do something on there that helps a little bit? And then I guess the other one is, when you have those really short turnaround times, are these, and I'm sure the answer is it depends, but is one of those things where there's 20 questions on there and they only expect you to get to 10, or kind of like, or most of the time it's like they expect you to complete everything and then some.
What I will say for that is, if you have questions about the prompt is not clear, don't be shy about reaching out to the people who provided it. I mean, when you're interviewing, you want to find the best candidates. It's not about tricking people. You're like, gotcha, yeah, this person can't code, I knew it. No, these people, they want to help you. They want to find the best candidates. So it's mutually beneficial that, if there's any things that are not clear, that you do reach out and clarify them. That's what I will say with that. The other point there is, you do the best you can, and it's better to admit that you just don't know something. So if you get a question of like, well, why didn't you do this approach? I think a perfectly acceptable answer, this is just my opinion, but perfectly acceptable answer is, well, I didn't know about that, or I don't have a lot of expertise in that, but I'm willing to learn. Rather than trying to make something up and you're probably going to fall flat on your face because you don't know anything about a topic, but heard some buzzwords and are trying to throw them out there. So that's
fair. Yeah, that's the last thing you want is to get called on your bullshit. And then, well, I guess YouTube's not going to like this video anymore. They'll live, but yeah, no, that's probably one of the worst things you can do. I agree. Sometimes, at least from my perspective in hiring non-technical people, I'd rather have someone be upfront with what they don't know and what they do know, because that allows you to actually assess. And like, no one knows everything. We tell you we want you to know everything, but we also know that that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
In your experience, I guess more recent experience, have you found people reaching out to you or your team for when they're doing technical interviews, or at least during your hiring process?
Sometimes we get questions.
Yeah. More question is like, how common is it, or is it kind of just like every now and then? Like it's like you wouldn't, like, if someone sends you a question like, "Hey, this doesn't make any sense," you wouldn't be like, "Oh no, like you're dumb." Like you're like, "Oh no, let me look at this and actually like answer this question."
Yeah, I would never say that. And again, this is just me speaking. I can't speak for everybody in the world, but I wouldn't want to evaluate somebody based on if they have questions and are asking them, be like, why did this person ask a question? I'm going to evaluate on their solution, how well they explain the end product. That's what really matters to me. So if there's questions out there, and especially if it's causing somebody undue stress, it's like, just ask for it. Ask if you can clarify, and you'll think clear. You'll have a better solution. That's better for everybody involved, in my opinion.
It's a win-win. So I think the takeaway is, for something you don't know, call it out, and then document as much as you can. So even if it's not super clear, or maybe you messed up somewhere along the way, they know what you're trying to do and kind of where you're trying to go. So at least you have that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like if you do mess up and you turn it in, that's something you can say, like, hey, at the time I did this solution, but now after some thought, I think I would have actually done it this way. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. We've got time for a couple more questions. If any audience has another burning question about these kinds of interviews. One question that I have, how, I guess, generally speaking, do you get multiple kind of take-home exercises, or is it, generally speaking, kind of a one-time thing during the full process?
Usually, my impression is a one-time thing.
Okay.
I mean, hopefully not multiple things. That's a lot. I mean, a take-home interview itself can be a lot. So, yeah, having a lot of it's just a little. That's overreaching, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Alrighty. Well, I don't see anyone else having any more questions, so I think we can call it a night. Yep.
There's actually one I feel like I didn't address thoroughly in this last one here. In your opinion, for a timed assessment, like 3 or 4 hours, how important is it to complete all the steps? Hopefully, in my experience, I've seen prompts where it says, like, you may not get through all the steps, and they'll call that out. That's another question that you can ask. Now, obviously, the goal is to get through as much as you can, but if you don't get through everything, still submit it, see what happens. The worst that can happen is they say no.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I think sometimes what will happen is they'll actually see like the logic. So they'll say, okay, well, you weren't able to get through it all, but I understand how you think. And I think quite often, like, the goal of these things, like most people that I talk to, is like, you don't need to be like the best coder in the room, right? You need to be good enough, and what's more important is you have to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And if the logic is there, then maybe you might not be like the top candidate, but you're kind of in the conversation.
Yep. So yeah, go for it.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's a wrap for this one. This conversation is, of course, being recorded. We'll post it to the YouTube channel. You'll all get an email with that. Thanks for giving us your Wednesday evenings, or if you're not in Chicago or the US, then maybe it's either early morning for you. I think there's someone from Spain who wanted to make the last one. If you're still here, please give me a thumbs up. But definitely really appreciate everyone taking the time. Look out for next week. We're going to be doing something totally different, much less technical, talking about insights with someone from Instacart. So that'll be really cool. But we tie it all together, going back to what that business question looks like and how to make sure that regardless of what end of the data spectrum you're on, you're adding value and you're connecting your work to that data prompt. So with that said, thanks everyone for coming. Please give us a like and keep coming back. We've got an interesting lineup coming up. Speakers from LinkedIn, Spotify, a few others on the docket. So super important. And of course, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Thanks again, everyone.